Good afternoon, everyone. I am Brianna Alexis Aloka, and we are going to talk about Philippine laws and gender responsive and gender fair education. Don't worry, I will just discuss and report the rationales and brief description of each programs to shorten the report. Friends and classmates, have you ever noticed how we Filipinos have a high regard for our education? Filipinos are perceived to have a deep and high regard for education. Most Filipino parents always put in the minds of their children, us, on the onset of attending school, that we need to study hard and do our best in our studies so we will land on a good, high-paying job. They believe that we will become more competent and independent. The Filipinos' high regard for education comes from the view that education is a pillar of national development and a primary avenue for social and economic mobility. A clear evidence of the value placed on education is the proportion of the national government budget going to the sector. The Department of Education, or DepEd, the country's biggest bureaucracy, is given the highest budget allocation among government agencies each year as required by the 1987 Philippine Constitution. The 1987 Constitution likewise guarantees the right to education of every Filipino. It provided that the state shall protect and promote the right of all citizens to quality education at all levels and shall take appropriate steps to make education accessible to all. Education in the Philippines is a constitutional right. No one should be deprived of education, regardless of one's gender, social status, religion, etc. Now, numerous laws enforce and protect one's right to education, with specific consideration for the issues that arise from one's strategic and practical gender needs. There are 6 pertinent documents on gender in the Philippines. First is the Philippine Development Plan for Women 1989 to 1992 or PDPW. Second is the Philippine Plan for Gender Responsive Development 1995 to 2025 or PPGD. Third, Women's Empowerment, Development, and Gender Equality Plan or Women's EDGE Plan. Fourth is the Magna Carta of Women. Fifth, the NEDA's Harmonized Gender and Development Guidelines. And sixth is the CHED's 2010 establishing the policies and guidelines on gender and development in the Commission on Higher Education and Higher Education Institutions. 2 of the mentioned programs are the primary plans that highlight the value of education as an important social sector. These are the PDPW and the PPGD. Let's first talk about the Philippine Development Plan for Women 1989 to 1992 or PDPW. So for the brief description of PDPW, it was approved and adopted in February 17, 1989 through Executive Order 348. It specifically identifies programs and projects to address the following forms of violence against women: domestic violence, rape, sexual harassment, pornography, prostitution, military rapes, and sexual abuses and medical abuse. This may include abortion and cesareans. Now, the following are the rationales for the formulation of the PDPW. First is to institutionalize the integration of women's concerns in the development process. Second is to operationalize the constitutional provision on women. The state recognizes the role of women in nation building and shall ensure the fundamental equality before the law of women and men. This was stated in Article 2, Section 14 of the 1987 Constitution. Third is to substantiate in more concrete terms the macro statement in the medium term Philippine Development Plan or MTPDP, which flows from the gender equality provision of the Constitution. Women who constitute half of the nation's population shall be effectively mobilized, and fourth, to comply with international conventions and agreements such as the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women or CEDAW, and the Forward-Looking Strategies for the Advancement of Women or FLS up to the year 2000 to which the Philippines is a signatory. Next is the Philippine Plan for Gender Responsive Development 1995 to 2025 or PPGD. It was signed on September 8, 1995 through Executive Order 273 by President Fidel V. Ramos. It contains the long-term vision of women's empowerment and gender equality and translates the Beijing Platform for Action into policies and strategies and programs and projects for Filipino women. The Philippine Plan for Gender Responsive Development, or PPGD, rests on a vision of development that is equitable, sustainable, free from violence, respectful of human rights, supportive of self-determination, and the actualization of human potentials, and participatory and empowering. It places people at the center and aims to make development work for all groups. However, it recognizes that discrimination exists on the basis of gender, class, and ethnicity. In the light of historical gender inequities, it puts gender emphasis on women as a disadvantaged group. Now we are going to talk about Women's Edge Plan, or Women's Empowerment Development and Gender Equality Plan, or Women's Edge Plan. The Women's Edge Plan responds to the commitment to realizing the presidential gender vision. From a lack of concern for gender disparities and shortfalls to the promotion of equal gender opportunity in all spheres of public policies and programs. Given its thematic and sectoral priorities, the Women's Edge Plan embodies several laws and policies intended to address gender disparities. It provides a platform for implementing these laws and policies and monitoring and evaluating their implementation against the envisioned gender equality results and outcomes of the plan. Principal among these laws and policies are those that focus on gender equality and women's empowerment, which the Philippines has committed to implementing. So these policies that mandates for the Women's Edge Plan are the PPGD, which we discussed earlier, the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the Magna Carta of Women. Now we are going to talk about the Magna Carta of Women. The Magna Carta of Women, or MCW, or Republic Act of 9710, was signed into law on August 14, 2009. It reiterates the constitutional policy declaring, "The state affirms the role of women in nation building and ensures the substantive equality of women and men," defining, recognizing, and upholding the human rights of women. The MCW implements the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, which seeks to eliminate discrimination by dismantling social structures such as laws and institutions that treat women unequally and bar them from attaining their full human development. So basically, Magna Carta of Women is a comprehensive women's human rights law that seeks to eliminate discrimination against women by recognizing, protecting, fulfilling, and promoting the rights of Filipino women, especially those in marginalized sector. Another pertinent document is NADA's Harmonized Gender and Development Guidelines. The set of guidelines subscribes to the idea that development involves the expansion of freedoms and strengthening of capabilities. In this connection, it recognizes that equality between women and men is a key women's human right. Participation in development is crucial to the empowerment of women and men. Gender equality means promoting the equal participation of women as agents of economic, social, and political change, and achieving equality between women and men may involve the introduction of specific measures designed to eliminate prevailing gender inequalities and inequities. For the last one, we are going to talk about CHAD's 2010 establishing the policies and guidelines on gender and development in the Commission on Higher Education and Higher Education Institutions. I didn't insert all of the guidelines since it was too long, but in general, it tackles on how to introduce and institutionalize gender equality and responsiveness and sensitivity in the various aspects of Philippine higher education. So the guidelines shall apply to CHED, including the central and regional offices, and to all higher education institutions, both private and public. In terms of scope, the guidelines include enabling mechanisms that CHAD and higher education institutions shall establish, such as curriculum development, gender-responsive research programs, and gender-responsive extension programs. Overall, these programs that we have tackled have a common goal, which is to envision a society that promotes gender equality and women's empowerment and upholds human rights, among other development goals. It also commits the Philippine government to addressing issues of poverty, violence against women, and other abuses of women's human rights and the continuing invisibility of women in public affairs. It was also evident how women are the central concern for these programs, since there is a greater emphasis on women as a disadvantaged group.